.NET Core 3 promises to be a big update to how you build desktop applications in C#. With it comes upgrades to .NET Core for WinForm apps and WPF apps. In this video, we're going to look at how to build and package WPF apps in .NET Core 3.0. We'll also look at .NET Framework WPF applications just for comparison to see what's changed. And finally, we'll look at a WinForm app in .NET Core 3.0, although that'll be a little bit different. Now, this video uses the Preview 7 release of .NET Core 3.0. We're looking ahead at what will be, not what you should be using today in production. WPF is now stable enough to demo, but you'll notice that the WinForm app is more difficult to work with since it does not yet have a visual designer, kind of a drawback for that drag and drop WinForm experience. Now, the source code for today's video is available to download using the link below in the description. You'll also find links there to sign up for my mailing list and for Patreon. Now, if you're a member of either of these, make sure you're checking your email this week. For Patreon members at the $10 per month level or higher, you'll be receiving the application idea PDF shortly. Also, I'll be releasing my office tour video on Patreon this week to members at all levels. I actually just recorded it about 10 minutes ago. Now, for mailing list members, don't forget that the Christmas and July sale ends this week. It's the end of July, so make sure to get those deals while they last. All right, so let's get started. So I have Visual Studio open here. This is Visual Studio 2019. Let's create a new project. And we're going to do a .NET Core, and I've filtered it already, C# Windows Desktop. So that's why it's filtered to this list. And I have WPF App .NET Core. Now, if you don't have the preview bits for .NET Core 3.0, you won't see this option. You have to be running the preview version of Visual Studio 2019 and have updated it recently because .NET Core 3.0 Preview 7 came out just a few days ago. So notice the preview in the upper right hand corner here, and now it says WPF App .NET Core. Now, if you don't want to use the preview bits, if you're just looking for what's coming, that's fine. But this will be out in theory around September. So the release to manufacturing, the RTM version, the version that is generally available is going to be in September. There's going to be a version that is ready to release, but it's kind of like their final version, the one that they're anticipating to be released, but they want to have, make sure there's no more bugs and stuff like that. That'll be done hopefully in July or early August. So seeing how it's July 28th right now, it'll probably be early August before that comes out. But that'll be the last version that's ready. Now, with that being said, I have not yet seen a visual editor for WinForms. So I'm wondering if we're going to push off .NET Core 3.0's release, or if maybe WinForms won't be a part of it, and maybe it'll be a 3.1 or something of that nature. Not sure yet. This is all tentative timelines based upon what we've seen so far. So, with that being said, WPF App .NET Core. Now we're going to call this, let's call this the WPF Core is a project name, and for the solution name is Core 3 Demos. Let's call it that. I'm not going to put dot in there. I'm not going to put spaces. I'm not going to, I'm trying to avoid all those special characters. I just want numbers and letters, so therefore Core 3 Demos. All right, so let's first look at a .NET Core 3.0 WPF application. So once this gets created, there we go. It's going to look a lot like your typical WPF application. You have your designer, you have your XAML, you have code that looks like code, and you have the code behind for your WPF. That's it right there. That looks just like normal C# code. And that's really the beauty of .NET Core 3.0 or .NET Core in general. People often ask, well, is all that .NET Framework stuff outdated? And the answer is no, because you almost can't tell if you're in .NET Core or .NET Framework, because the C# looks almost identical. There may be a slight difference here or there. For example, we don't have an app.config here, but for the most part, it's identical. So let's actually create right away our WPF application for .NET Framework so we can see the differences. So right-click on Solution and say Add New Project, WPF App for .NET Framework. We hit Next, and we're going to call this WPF Framework. So there's two F's there, WPF, and then another F for Framework. We hit Create, and I'm doing a .NET Framework 4.7.2. I'll hit Create in that, and now we have basically the same thing. I mean, if you look, the big difference is that we compare the WPF Core versus the WPF Framework. We see that we have dependencies first, where here we have properties and references, and then we have app.xaml, and then we skip app.config, but we have app.xaml. Let's compare these two. So let's do this. Let's close everything out. And let's open up, this is the core on the left, and then we'll open up app.xaml, the full framework on the right. And let's make sure I get this right. I did. So I've changed Visual Studio so that when I click on a file, it highlights it over here on the right. So notice this is the full framework version, and the left over here is the core version. Notice the differences or lack thereof. They look pretty much identical. So there's not big changes in how the app.xaml works. So let's look at the main window and open that on the left and the right. Same thing on the right is going to be the full framework. On the left is going to be the XAML. I'm sorry, be the .NET Core. And again, it's the same. I mean, word for word, the same. Let's try it again with the code behind. So view code here, and then view code here. And again, you can't tell the differences. They're the same thing. And that's kind of what the first step I want to highlight is the fact that if you're used to working with WPF in full framework, you're used to working in .NET Core version of WPF. They're the same thing. The big differences are you don't have app.config. So this app.config where we store things like our connection strings. You don't have that in .NET Core. You also don't have the same way of dealing with references. So references over here, we have this references. Over here we have dependencies. And from there we can see the dependencies we have on here. We can also right click and still say manage NuGet packages. So it's very, very similar, and you can get the same things done, but it's just a little bit of difference. Now, coming back to app.config, this is one where you're probably going to need an app.config or something similar, and that's where you'd have your app settings.json file. And that's for storing important information like connection strings. Now, one of the things that .NET Core is helping us do is remember that maybe it's not the best idea to store your connection string in a text file. Instead, maybe you should put that into Key Vault, which is on Azure, or some other secure way of storing that connection string so that you're not storing passwords in clear text when they shouldn't be. Now, just to be, again, clear on this side, with desktop applications, you're going to need to store that password in a way that the user could get access to it. Because at the very least, they may be running the application on their desktop, and even if you encrypt it in every way possible, they pretty much still have access to that connection string if they are motivated enough. So still don't give them access that they shouldn't have in that connection string. And that's where, if you watch my video on connecting C# to SQL or SQL to C#, I talk about the idea of making sure that connection string is only limited to just what you want the user to have access to. And that's a whole nother rabbit trail, but I'll make sure I point that out, that with these desktop applications, you're going to have a connection string somewhere that the user has access to, even if it's encrypted, because they own one side of the encryption, so they can still get access to that somehow. Okay, so with that being said, if we're going to go to our this application here, let's close out everything else. But rats, get too fast and close out everything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something I tell you not to do, and I'm going to show you why. But also, it's a quick and easy way to just create something on the form. So if I had a button and I drag and drop it onto the design window and it puts a button here, I tell you not to do this because this kind of defeats the purpose of, and I almost broke it. There we go. This defeats the purpose of WPF. A lot of the benefits you get from WPF and the HTML-like way it lays things out, because notice it's just on here. And it says, here's the margin, and then it says, here's the height, and here's the width. And these are all fixed numbers. It cannot grow and shrink as needed. It's going to be fixed to this size no matter what. That's not how WPF was designed to work. But that's what you get when you drag and drop. So you drag and drop, I would encourage you take the margin off, take the height and the width off, and then you'll have a button that is designed. It's got all the text in there that you need, and you can play around how it's set up. But at the same time, it's not fixed in one specific position. Then you can put it into your grid in a more designed way. With that being said, I'm just going to put it here and say, hello world, something like that. It's not even going to work. This is not about making a WPF application, because WPF works the same way here as it does in full framework. In fact, one of the questions you may have is, if you see my other WPF videos where I talk about Caliburn.Micro and doing MVVM framework, I use Caliburn.Micro a lot because Caliburn.Micro for me is a way to make MVVM much easier to implement. Some people have asked, why don't you use just straight up WPF and do your own MVVM? And the reason why is because it's kind of like reinventing the wheel every time. And I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. I want to have somebody else having done the hard work, and I just build on top of them. So that's why I use Caliburn.Micro. So the question may be, well, can I use Caliburn.Micro? Well, if you right-click on dependencies in our Core app and say Manage NuGet Packages and go to Browse, we can look for Caliburn.Micro. And the very first result is Caliburn.Micro. And right down here it says dependencies are on Core, and this will work in this version, or it should. So we install this, and it should work in our .NET Core, just as it is. Now it does say that it's targeting the .NET Framework instead of the .NET Core. So with that being said, we could still use it, but there is going to be some quirks possibly with how it works and how it compiles. Now, this is not the end of the world, because even though it points to .NET Framework, we can, I believe, still use it in .NET Core, and we can target that. But also, and let's be very clear on this, just because WPF has .NET Core behind it does not mean it will run on anything besides Windows. The clue's in the name. WPF stands for Windows Presentation Framework, or Foundation Framework, I think. Anyways, it's one of those two Fs, but it's Windows. That's what W stands for, Windows. It will only work on Windows, and that there's a whole series of reasons why. But basically, it's based upon DirectX, which is a Windows-only thing, and some other things as well. So you're not going to get cross-platform compatibility with a WPF .NET Core app. So that the next question that may come up is, well then Tim, why would I ever move to .NET Core for my WPF application when .NET Framework works just fine? And the answer is yes, it does work just fine. However, .NET Framework is done as of 4.8. And what I mean by done is not that it's over. Life is not over for .NET Framework. In fact, it's got a very, very long lifespan ahead of it. It just won't be getting any new updates except for security fixes. So 4.8 is the last feature update version of the .NET Framework. That's why the next major version after .NET Core 3.1 or something like that, the next major version though is going to be .NET 5, which is going to bring in .NET Core and I believe Xamarin and the other things as well, and kind of combine them under one umbrella and one language and one framework, and it's just being .NET. And it's .NET 5 because the last .NET Framework version was 4.8. So, with all that kind of backstory, the reason why we're moving, the reason why Microsoft is moving over to .NET Core for the backer of WPF is because it's the language that will continue to be updated. .NET Framework is a mature language. It's got a lot of stuff in it, and you probably could do just fine working for the next 10 years or so in .NET Framework. However, we want all the shiny new goodness for our desktop applications. That's where .NET Core comes in. Also, and here's a really big addendum to that, is that .NET Framework is slow in comparison to .NET Core. .NET Core is much, much faster. And the reason for that, if you think about it, becomes a little obvious. .NET Framework has come since 2001, 2002 timeframe. And so for the past 17, 18 years or so, it has supported all those changes. And a lot's happened in 18 years of software development. And so there's a lot of legacy stuff inside the .NET Framework. Now, I've cleaned some of it out, but with .NET Core, they went back to the drawing board and reimagined how these things should work and work better. And so .NET Core is much, much faster. And so just moving your application, which probably about 95 to 98% of it, if you have an existing application, most of it will go over to .NET Core without a problem. So just by doing that, you'll see a speed increase in your application, a pretty significant one, depending on how you use different parts of the framework or .NET. So there's definitely a huge benefit to moving over. And as you can see, the differences are minor. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. Now, let's talk about how do we get this application deployed. Now, if you were to, let's just build the solution here for a minute. And once we do that, let's look at, we'll do the .NET Framework version. We'll open this folder in File Explorer. We'll bring it up and look at our bin debug folder. And we have this exe, which that's the actual application, and then our config file, which is our app.config file. Pretty simple stuff. If we do the same thing with .NET Core and go to our bin folder debug, we get .NET Core App 3.0. And here's all the DLLs. Now we do have the Caliburn.Micro DLLs, but then we have the core DLL, we have the exe, and we have some JSON files, which has the runtime config, and some dependencies and all the rest. How do you actually deploy this? Well, let's do this. Let's delete the, actually can't delete it right now, no problem. Let's just close this out. What we're going to do is we're going to set this WPF Core App up for deployment. Now, first I'm going to get rid of that NuGet package, just to make sure it doesn't cause any problems for me. We don't need it. There we go. Loading. Well, should be good. Clean the solution, and we will wait to build it. So this is a really, really simple, nothing extra, simple application. Okay, it's just one form with one button. If we run this application, which we can, I'll show you. It's going to pop up and it's going to look like this. And notice again that button won't move really. It'll move side to side, but not top to bottom. It can cover up, but it doesn't do anything. But that's our Hello World button. Okay, so how do we package this up? Well, if we click on the WPF Core application, it's going to pop up the CS proj file. Now, this is something new that you can't do with .NET Framework projects. Notice I click on here, nothing changes, because I can't edit this project type while it's loaded. You actually used to have to unload your project and then make the edits. Now with .NET Core applications, you can actually click on them and make the edits right away. So that's really helpful. You can do this live. We're going to have to make some edits here in order to get this to work the way we want. And the reason why is because I'm going to want to, the end goal here is I want to deploy an executable file, an exe file, that has everything I need inside of it. So, and that includes .NET Core. I want to deploy everything as one executable file. No DLLs, no extra stuff, just one exe I can give to somebody on a thumb drive and say, hey, run this, and it's my complete application. They don't have to have anything installed on their Windows machine. They can have, an older version of the .NET Core. They can have no .NET Core. They can have no .NET Framework. Doesn't matter. My exe will run. How do we do that? That's our end goal. But first, let's right-click and say Publish. We're going to publish to a folder. And this path is fine. Let's remember, though, bin/release/.NET Core 3.0/publish. Cool. Let's create the publish profile is all. We're going to edit it and say, sounds good. Runtime, our target runtime is portable. Let's change it to a 64-bit target. And we're going to say, let's do framework dependent first, meaning you have to have .NET Core 3.0 installed on the machine. Let's save that, and we're going to publish this. It'll take a little bit just because it's going to be the first time especially, a little bit slow, but wow, that's done already. So that was quick. So let's right click and open folder in File Explorer. Go to bin, release, .NET Core 3, publish, and here is our WPF Core.exe, which is 157 kilobytes. We have a WPF Core DLL, which is 6 kilobytes. And then we have our JSON and PDB and our JSON file. The only files we really need to run this application are these two right here. And if we double click this, then we get our application like so. So it works. However, I have .NET Core 3 installed on my machine. You might not have that somewhere else. So let's redo this. Let's go back out of here and we'll delete the release folder. And we're going to try it again. Let's move this off the screen for now. We're going to make this edit and say, well, we want it to be self-contained, meaning bring that whole .NET Framework or .NET Core with you and package it up as part of our application. Let's hit save and we'll hit publish. And what this will do is it will bring everything it needs to run our application and put it in the file with us. So release, .NET Core 3, publish. Notice all the stuff that comes with it. This is all the files with our application, including WPF Core.exe. And it's still 157 kilobytes. We also have our WPF Core.dll, which is 6 kilobytes. So what's changed? Well, all this other stuff. These are all the things. If we look, we go down here, system.core, system.console, system.configuration. These sound familiar. System.data. That's because these are Microsoft's DLLs. This is what is in either .NET Framework or .NET Core, depending on which one you're using. In this case, it's the .NET Core stuff. So that's all Microsoft stuff. So instead of having to install the .NET Core 3.0 Preview 7 version on a target machine, you can just copy this entire publish folder and paste it somewhere and then have the user run WPF Core.exe. Now, it looks overwhelming, but the reality is we're used to this on our computers. If you go to your program files and look at, let's say, Office, there's a ton of DLLs. There's a ton of files. We don't look at those. We keep them all in our program files folder, and we just have a shortcut to Word.exe or Excel.exe. Well, in this case, you do the same thing. You have a folder and have a shortcut to WPF Core.exe. That would work. However, if you're looking to give this to a user and have them just run it themselves, this is confusing. They're going to ask you, which file do I execute? And obviously, it's going to be a lot of different choices. That's not the greatest idea. So let's go back to our bin folder and delete our release again. And this time we're going to come back to that CS proj file, the WPF Core CS proj file. We're going to add a few options here. So inside of property group, we have 3 options to add. First of all is runtime identifier. Notice the IntelliSense. Pretty cool. So win.x64. How do I know that that's the value to put in here? Well, if we come over here to our publish window, you go to edit, win-x64. My other options are win-x86 for a 32-bit application. This one currently is a 64-bit application. I could do an ARM application or OS X and Linux different versions. I can't compile a WPF application for Linux since it won't run on Linux. So I've added that runtime identifier. The second thing we need to add is publish single file. Now this is not in IntelliSense. So publish, make sure I get it spelled right, publish single file and true. And then also publish trimmed. And the reason these are not in IntelliSense, that's also true, is because these are brand new. They're just recently added to .NET Core 3.0. I believe they were first added, the publish trimmed, I believe it was first added in Preview 6, and now I'm currently on Preview 7. So it's been recently. But publish single file is true, and then publish trimmed is true. So what single file does is it says, I want everything in one exe. So .NET Core 3.0 Preview 7, include that with the executable with all its DLLs. But then publish trimmed says, we really don't want to have the entire .NET Core 3 in our exe, because that seems wasteful. Because I'm not using certain parts of .NET Core 3.0. For example, I haven't even touched system.data. So there's no reason to put system.data into my application. So publish trimmed, what it's going to do is going to read my application. It's going to see what parts of .NET Core it uses, and that's going to put just those parts into my executable. So let's save this. And now let's publish again. Notice I still have self-contained, x64, and all the rest. However, because I set those settings up and I hit publish, it's going to, first of all, say build failed. Excellent. This is preview bits. Let's look at my output, just make sure that, or my error list, sorry. All right, it's complaining about my OBJ folder, which really is a folder we can get rid of. What I'm going to do is delete that folder entirely because it will recreate it. I think that might solve my problem. It's going to restore my files, start to publish, and it looks like it's going to work this time. This will take a little longer. And the reason why is it's going through and scanning my application, seeing what it needs, and creating that file for me. So this is a little longer, but the result is going to be an executable file that we can deploy to our users. So bin, release, .NET Core 3.0, publish, and there you go. Just one file. The PDB is use for debugging. You don't have to, and you probably shouldn't give that to users. So just our exe. Now, if you notice the file size, it used to be 157 kilobytes. Now, not sure you can see that or not, but it's 91 megabytes. That's a significant difference. However, like I said, that has all of .NET Core 3.0 Preview 7 embedded in it. So you can run this application. It will run just like it would normally, and the result is you can run it on any computer that has Windows on it, even if it doesn't have .NET Core on it. So that is the full compressed single file deployable exe for your WPF application. So that's something new with .NET Core 3.0 is this single file, trimmed file that you can deploy with .NET Core baked right into it. All right, so that is WPF. We can deploy that using that file or using that whole set of files, or not decide to do a framework dependent instead. If we do framework dependent, then we expect to have .NET Core already installed on the machine, and that just does the exe and the DLL, and you can copy those over. Okay, so that's how we can publish our file. Now, obviously, we wouldn't want to do a right-click publish every time. We want to have some kind of build process in place, and that can be done. But this shows you at least how to do that. Also, I'd probably still add on top of this Squirrel or some other way of packaging it into an MSI file of some type for deployment. That we can have it installed and uninstall as well. But it's really convenient just to copy this exe over somewhere and paste it on a desktop and have the user run it. So that's a great alpha version, beta version that you can just give to somebody and not have to do a lot of work around compiling and building and deploying and packaging and all the rest for your application to give it to somebody. So just something to think about, but that's WPF Core versus Framework. Framework, you cannot do that the same way. The publishing is a bit different, and it can get a little messy. It's just not quite the same thing. So this is more of the, if we wanted to do the, I'm drawing a blank here, but click once application. That's what we're talking about. You can do that like that. But this has a lot more options to it with our WPF Core. Okay, so that's WPF Core. Like I said, XAML, pretty much the same stuff. You can still do anything you want in your XAML like normal. It has the drop down menu. You can see we can add anything you want here, data grid, all the rest. So it's just the same. Okay, so let's talk about WinForms now. I promised we'd get into WinForms. Let's add a WinForm project, a WinForm Core project. So if we go and we search for form, now notice I have my filter on still, a C# Windows desktop. So I say forms and I get .NET Framework and .NET Core. I'm going to do a .NET Core. I'm going to say WinForm Core. And hit create. And it's a little different. Okay, it opens up this right here, this is the code behind for our form. That's cool. And it says form 1, cool. So I double click on it and I get this. And this is typically the screen we see. And if you're not careful, you don't read this. But typically we see this when we delete an event handler when we haven't deleted it from the front end. We get something like this. But that's not what this is. Instead, what it is the designer's not there. They don't have a visual designer yet for Windows Forms for .NET Core. It's coming. And there are some workarounds. And I debated if I show you the workaround or not. I decided not to. And the reason why is not because I want to deprive you of that information or I don't think you should do it. If you have the need right now to design a .NET Core WinForm application, then yes, there's some workarounds. Give them a shot. But in the next couple of months, probably next month or so, we'll have a visual designer for WinForms. So there's not really a need, I don't think, to learn those workarounds unless you're going to do it right now. But with that said, if we set this as a startup project and we hit go, we get a WinForm application. So there's a standard WinForm application. We can still write code against it. We can still, if we go to the designer, the CS file, we could modify this to actually change things in here, add things manually, position them where they should go using the coordinate system. It's ugly, and no one wants to do it that way because that makes WinForms ridiculously hard. And one of the benefits of WinForms is it was designed for drag and drop, where WPF really wasn't. So you lose that benefit, so you lose a lot of the reason why you use WinForms. So that being said, they are in place in .NET Core 3. For right now, I would encourage, if you're going to do WinForm development, I would say maybe hold off on new development. But if you wanted to upgrade an application from .NET Framework to .NET Core to try it out, that would work just fine with WinForms. So you can still do that. You can still run the application. And in fact, I'll have a video on that shortly on how to upgrade a WinForm or WPF application over to .NET Core from .NET Framework. That's going to be coming. And I'm debating even taking my my C# application from start to finish course, where I build a WinForm application with some pretty complicated stuff in the background for logic and data access. I'm thinking about moving that over as well to .NET Core and doing a course on that, just to see more of a real-world, larger application being ported over. So you can see that. And also, of course, IAmTimCorey Retail Manager. That's one of the big things behind that was we're building it as a .NET Framework application intentionally so that we can have that porting experience over to .NET Core. Because in the workplace today, most applications that are currently in existence are .NET Framework. Therefore, there's going to be a large period of time where there's going to be a need for the skill in transferring from .NET Framework over a .NET Core. So I'm going to try and make sure that you have the skills and tools necessary to make that transition as easy and painless as possible. Okay? So that's what we get with WinForms. It's not really there yet. It's not really ready yet. The code works just fine. It's just the designer that's missing. Now, I haven't touched on the other desktop-based application, which is the console application, because console has been running for a while. It's been .NET Core, oh goodness, might even be .NET Core 1.0 got the console app. Not positive on that one. But it's been around for a while because consoles work across platform. So a console application will work on Windows, on Mac, and on Linux, and pretty much do the same thing as well. They haven't really changed how they operate. It's just that now they work cross-platform. And I've already covered those before, so I'm not going to bring them into this video. This is more about the new .NET Core 3.0 stuff. So I have a question for you. I want you to leave down the answer down in the comments. But what are you looking forward to? What things about .NET Core 3.0 have sparked your interest? Maybe it's not even about the desktop application, but it's about something else that's happening in 3.0. There's some nice big tweaks in there. We're moving away from Newtonsoft JSON to built-in JSON parsers, so that's another big thing that's happening. But what are you looking forward to? What are the things that you would like to see me cover that I haven't yet in the .NET Core 3.0 space, or even .NET Core in general? We'll be doing some more .NET Core website building, web app building, with Razor Pages and MVC, as well as playing around with the class libraries you can create with those as well. As you know, this channel is all based upon your feedback. So anything you can give me as far as what you want to see, I put that on a list, and as more people say it, I bump it up the priority. And here's the way I think about things. If you say something, that probably means that there's 30 or 40 people out there or more that are also thinking it. So for every person that thinks that, I multiply that by a large number. So your voice makes a big impact on what happens. Okay? So there's a lot of stuff coming down the pike, but I would be interested in hearing what you would like to see next, especially in the .NET Core area. Okay? Thanks for watching. Like I said, the source code for this, what there is of the source code, is in the link down in the description. Go ahead and click on that if you want that. And also, if you haven't already, I appreciate a like for this video, and also make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you can get alerted every time I release a new video. Mondays and Thursdays is the schedule right now. Okay? Thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.